In July of 2019, I worked as a junior counselor at a summer camp in upstate New York called Camp Red Pine. It was buried deep in the forest with no cell reception and spotty electricity. Most of the cabins were old log structures, barely updated since the 70s, and the camp prided itself on being unplugged and off the grid. I wasn't thrilled at first, but I needed the summer job before college and figured fresh air wouldn't kill me. The campers arrived in waves, and I was assigned to cabin 5 with another counselor named Sarah and 8 boys, all around 11 or 12. The first week went smoothly. Hikes, campfires, the usual mosquito bites and ghost stories. But around day 9, one of the boys, Owen, started acting off. He was quiet to begin with, but now he avoided the group altogether, wouldn't swim, wouldn't eat much. He started asking strange questions like, how do we know this is the real camp? Or what happens if you go too far past the trees? I chalked it up to homesickness and maybe too many late-night scary stories, but then one morning he wasn't in his bunk. I panicked, thinking maybe he'd wandered off. We searched the trails, the bathrooms, even the mess hall. Nothing. Just when we were about to alert the camp director, Owen came strolling up from the woods, calm as ever, with pine needles in his hair and dirt on his arms. I asked him where he'd been, and he said, "The other cabin." That caught me off guard. I asked which cabin he meant. He just pointed toward the far tree line behind the mess hall. There wasn't anything back there, just dense forest and maybe a trail or two we rarely used. I asked again what he was talking about, and he said, "It only shows up sometimes. It's like ours, but different. Everyone there already knows your name." I reported it to Sarah, and we both laughed it off. Kids make stuff up. But that night, I noticed Owen drawing something in his sketch pad. It was a cabin, similar in shape to the ones we had, but with tiny details that felt off. No windows, no chimney, and something that looked like a door on the roof. I asked him about it, but he just shrugged and went to bed. The next day, 2 other boys, Ethan and Kyle, disappeared during free time. I was terrified. We found them hours later, soaking wet and freezing near the lake. They couldn't explain what happened, only that they were looking for the cabin Owen told us about. That night, I confronted Owen. I told him he needed to stop scaring the other kids. He didn't say anything at first. Then he whispered, "It called me there. It knows what you dream about. I barely slept." At around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the screen door creaking. I grabbed my flashlight and slipped outside, expecting maybe someone needed the bathroom. But when I stepped out, I saw Owen standing at the edge of the woods, staring straight ahead. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. I walked closer, and that's when I saw it. Through the trees, maybe 100 yards into the forest, was a building. I swear to this day, it wasn't there before. A 1-room log cabin, totally silent, unlit, with a thick layer of moss crawling up the sides. The strange part was how the trees around it bent away, like they were trying to avoid it. I should have called for help. I should have turned back, but Owen stepped forward, and I followed him. When we reached the door, it opened on its own. Inside was colder than it should have been, not musty or damp, just still. There were bunks, almost identical to ours, but empty. On one of the beds was a journal. I picked it up. The name on the inside cover was mine, not similar, my full name in my handwriting, written in blue ink. I flipped through it. Page after page was filled with things I hadn't written yet, notes about future camp activities, things I'd thought but hadn't said out loud. The last page was dated the next day, and it read, "You never left." I turned to ask Owen if this was some kind of prank, but he was gone. I ran out of the cabin, screaming his name. The building was still behind me, but when I reached the clearing, it wasn't. Just trees, no door, no walls, like it had never been there. I found Owen walking back toward the real cabins a few minutes later. He didn't say anything, just went back to sleep. The next morning, I tried to explain what happened, but Sarah said I must have dreamed it. No one believed me. But later that afternoon, I checked my duffel bag. Tucked inside, between my clothes, was the journal, the exact one I'd held in that cabin. On the last page, a new sentence had appeared beneath my name. In handwriting, that wasn't mine. It said, "Thanks for visiting. Next time, don't bring a flashlight." I left Camp Red Pine 2 weeks early. No one ever found that cabin. No one tried to look, but sometimes I still see it in dreams. Sitting quietly in the woods, door cracked just enough, waiting for me to come back. Back in August of 2017, I volunteered as a lifeguard at a summer camp in northern Wisconsin, right on the edge of a huge glassy lake called Pelican Hollow. The camp itself was old but charming, wooden docks, canvas tents and fire pits that always smelled like burning marshmallows. I had just turned 20 and figured a summer on the water would be the perfect escape before my junior year of college. The campers were mostly kids between 8 and 13, and my job was to watch them during their swimming and canoeing hours. Easy stuff. I spent most days in a shaded chair on the lifeguard tower, scanning the surface of the lake while kids splashed and paddled around the shallows. About 2 weeks into the session, a camper named Ellie started asking strange questions. She was 9, smart, quiet, always wore a red bandana around her wrist. At first, she asked normal kid stuff. How deep the lake was, if there were fish, if anyone had ever drowned. I gave her the usual answers and reassured her everything was safe. But then she asked, "What do I do if she calls my name from the water?" I asked who she meant, thinking maybe she was just playing a game. Ellie looked at me with complete seriousness and said, "The girl who rides the canoe at night." That got my attention. I asked if she'd seen someone, thinking maybe a teen snuck off with a boat, but Ellie just shook her head. "She only comes when you're alone," she said. "She floats without paddling. She doesn't talk, just stares until you go to her." I didn't know what to make of it, so I logged it as a weird camp story and moved on. But a few days later, I overheard 2 other campers whispering about a girl in a canoe who drifts across the lake after dark. They said her boat doesn't make a sound, no ripples, and her dress is always dripping, even though she never touches the water. Now, I was paying attention. That night, out of sheer curiosity, I stayed late at the dock. Most of the staff were at the bonfire near the mess hall, so it was just me, a flashlight, and a slow breeze rolling across the water. I scanned the surface for a while, nothing but darkness and reflections. Then around midnight I saw movement, a canoe gliding smoothly across the lake. No paddles, no wind, just drifting. In the center of it was a girl sitting perfectly upright. I couldn't see her face, just a pale shape in what looked like a long dress, hair clinging to her shoulders. The boat moved with impossible grace, no sound, no effort. It stopped near the middle of the lake, completely still, and she turned her head toward the dock. Not frantically, not fast, just slow, deliberate, like she already knew I was there. I stepped back. The flashlight flickered. When I looked again, the canoe was gone. The next day, I went to the camp director, an older woman named June who had worked there for decades. I expected her to laugh it off, but when I mentioned the canoe, she went quiet. After a pause, she said, "Don't go near the water alone, especially not at night. Just don't." She didn't explain further. I knew better than to press her. That afternoon, Ellie went missing. She had been assigned to arts and crafts after lunch, but never showed up. Her cabin mates hadn't seen her since the morning. A full search began within an hour. Staff, volunteers, even some nearby rangers combed the woods. I was assigned to the lake. I paddled around for hours, calling her name. No one expected her to be in the water. She wasn't a strong swimmer, but something about her last conversation kept echoing in my mind. What do I do if she calls my name? Just before sunset, I saw something floating near the far end of the lake, a red bandana. I pulled it from the water, soaked and tangled with weeds. The temperature dropped almost instantly, and I swear I saw ripples spreading out from the center of the lake. No boat, no girl, but something moved under the surface, slow and wide. We never found Ellie. Her parents were brought in. The police got involved. They ruled it as a disappearance, likely into the woods, but the councillors knew better, so did I. 2 days later, a new camper arrived to fill an open spot. She was quiet, pale, maybe 9 or 10, with long black hair that stayed wet even in the sun. She never smiled, she wouldn't swim. And when I passed her by the fire circle that night, I saw something on her wrist, a red bandana. In late June of 2018, I signed up to be a camp counselor at Pinebrook Ridge, a secluded summer camp nestled in the Adirondacks of upstate New York. It was one of those places where the signal drops about halfway up the dirt road in, and all the cabins are named after trees. I was assigned to Cedar Cabin, which housed a group of 12-year-old boys and had supposedly been the original counselors' quarters decades ago. My co-counselor Alex was a little older than me and had worked Pinebrook the summer before. He seemed relaxed, experienced, and maybe a little too comfortable with the strange rumors the staff sometimes whispered when they thought the kids weren't listening. There were the usual scary stories, bear sightings, ghost trails, and the infamous bell in the woods that supposedly rang on its own if you got too close to the fire pit on the Western Trail after midnight. Most of it was typical campfire legend. But the one that made my skin crawl was about a counsellor named Mason. Supposedly years ago, no one could agree exactly when, he'd vanished during a night hike. The story went that he'd taken a group of campers down a less used trail and never came back. The campers were found hours later, lost and crying, saying Mason had stepped off the trail to answer someone whispering. They waited for him, but he never returned. Eventually, the story faded, but every few years someone would claim to have seen a tall figure in the woods near Cedar Cabin after dark, watching, unmoving. They always called him Mason, always said he was looking for his campers. I assumed it was an old tale made up to keep the younger staff on edge. Until the night I heard the knock. It was the second week of July. My cabin had finally quieted down after a long hike and campfire event, and I was finishing some paperwork at the small desk in the corner while Alex snored across the room. Just past 1 a.m. I heard a single knock on the back wall of the cabin, 3 sharp raps against the logs. Not the front door, not the windows, the back wall where no path ran and only trees stood. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The woods were silent. No bugs, no wind, just the low groan of the trees swaying in the dark. I walked around the back and saw nothing. But just as I turned to head back in, the beam of my flashlight hit something carved into the wood. 4 letters, freshly scratched, Mason. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I asked Alex if he knew anything about the old story being real, but he just laughed it off and said the name pops up every few summers when a new counselor gets spooked. I wanted to believe him. I tried to move on, but something kept gnawing at me, especially after one of my campers, Jonah, told me he had seen someone standing outside our window around 3 a.m. Tall man, didn't blink, just stood there until Jonah rolled over and hid under the covers. I checked the grass outside the window. There were no footprints, but the dew had been disturbed, like someone had stood there for a long time. Things escalated the following night. I woke up suddenly to the sound of someone walking inside the cabin. At first I thought it was Alex going to the bathroom, but his bunk was still full. All the campers were accounted for. The creaking floorboards stopped just behind me. I froze. The air was cold. Still, I turned slowly, but there was nothing there, no shadow, no sound, until I looked at the floor. There were wet boot prints, large, leading from the back door to the center of the cabin, but the door was still locked from the inside. I woke Alex, and for the first time he didn't shrug it off. He looked shaken, said this exact thing had happened to another counselor years ago. Same prints, same spot. Then he asked if I'd ever been down the abandoned trail, Winding Rock. I hadn't. He said it used to be a popular hike until the summer Mason vanished. It was eventually closed off after too many kids claimed they heard voices coming from the trees, whispers, calling their names. That afternoon, during free time, I walked down there myself. Curiosity overrode fear. The path was still visible, overgrown but walkable. About 15 minutes in, I came to a fork, no markers, no signs, just a tree with something nailed into it, a bell, small, rusted, hung by a single frayed rope. I stared at it for a long time, and just as I turned to leave, it rang, once, loud, echoing through the trees. I ran. That night, Jonah was missing. The cabin was locked, no sign of him anywhere. We found his flashlight on the porch, still warm to the touch. Search teams were dispatched. The entire camp combed the area. They found him at dawn, standing at the edge of the winding rock trail, barefoot, silent, staring into the trees. When we asked what happened, all he said he needed help finding the others. I left Pine Brook at the end of that summer and never returned. But last fall I got a letter. No return address. Inside was a camp photograph from years ago, dated July 1992. A group of kids in front of Cedar Cabin. In the back row was a tall counselor, hand on a kid's shoulder, smiling faintly. His name tag read Mason, the kid under his hand. It was Jonah. Same face, same scar on his left eyebrow, and scribbled in pen at the bottom of the photo was one sentence: "Some campers never really leave, neither do their counselors." If these true summer camp horror stories gave you chills, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. You never know who or what might be watching from the woods.